Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a candidate for controller in the state of California. You can follow him on Twitter at Lanhee Chen. Lanhee Chen, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you again.
I haven't seen you since the Brady Bunch box days at CNN.
It's been a long time. You know, it's clear you've gone on to bigger and better things.
Well, before we get to the race for controller, let's talk about CNN for a second. I don't know if you saw the handoff yesterday between Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo. Did you see that?
You know, I have to confess, I don't watch anymore. I don't. I really don't. I mean, it feels like a different place than when I was associated with the network, which was, you know, some number of years ago as you were. It's just a different place now.
It's very different. However, I am a fan of awkward moments. Let's listen.
I love you, brother.
I love you, D. Lemon.
All right. This is Don Lemon tonight. The calls are getting louder and louder. This is what I'm talking about. Top Democrats from New York to the White House calling on Governor Andrew Cuomo to resign.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
You can't see it through the radio, but Don had this mischievous look on his face as he did that.
Well, it's look, I'm glad someone's talking about it because and if people haven't read the report that the Attorney General put out on good Governor Cuomo, they should. It's quite the report.
Let's talk about your race for controller, because this is an office in the state of California, despite the sizable registration advantage that Democrats have. Republican candidates, including Congressman Tom McClintock, have gotten very, very, very close to winning the office, but they can't quite get over the hump and get there. It's an office that is financial in nature, and putting a good steward of the state's finances, the state's books in that office would be an important step at getting things back in order. How, as a Republican, do you intend on getting over that finish line that's been so close yet so elusive for so many Republicans?
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple different things. First of all, I think we are in a time right now when people in California are fed up with the status quo. You see it with the desire to recall Gavin Newsom. You hear it. You talk to Californians about what's going on with problems like homelessness and the drought, public safety, our schools, too many schools, having been closed last year. All of these issues, I think, to me, add up to a great frustration with what's going on in Sacramento. And I think what people want is they want someone just to go up there and execute the basic blocking and tackling. Get up there and say, listen, we've got to let taxpayers understand where their money's being spent, how it's being spent. We've got to give them some accountability and transparency for that. And it's the mixture of a message with the time. And I think the time is right for change in Sacramento. And that's why I really believe, look, this is not a race people follow closely. It's not one that generally gets people's heart rates up, but it should when they see how poorly managed this state is. And this office, the Office of Controller, is one where I really believe I can make a difference as a reformer, as someone coming in from the outside saying, let's get some problems solved and let's just get to work and get it done.
Let's talk about one of the great big financial disasters over the last year in California, and that's the Edd crisis.
Oh, yeah.
We had a system where people were prevented by state edict from going to work. If you worked at Disneyland, you couldn't go to work. If you were a bartender, the bars were closed. You couldn't go to work. If you worked at a car lot in the early days of the shutdown, you couldn't go to work. But people still had their mortgages to pay, and we had a state program to take care of them while the government prevented them from earning a living. The system absolutely collapsed. If you had an issue and you called them, you couldn't get through. In fact, Doug Ossie mentioned that last night, Randy.
Yes, he did. He absolutely mentioned it, and he mentioned it right here.
Just answer the damn phone.
Few words, but he made his point. But we had this situation where people who were owed the money couldn't get it, yet we had criminals criminal rings, in fact, organized crime, who were able to get billions and billions of dollars from the state of California. And you listen to some of these district attorneys, and they say, oh, yeah, organized crime used EDD money to go out and buy guns and to buy drugs and do all sorts of things that we don't want them doing. And you say to yourself, who's minding the store? If elected controller, what would you do to prevent situations like this from happening again?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. This is the single largest fraud, I think the single largest fraud perpetrated on California taxpayers ever, up to $30 billion, billion with a B, in fraudulent payments. You mentioned to Russian and Chinese mobsters, to convicted felons like Scott Peterson. I mean, this is a scandal. If this were a scandal in some other states, I mean, you'd be talking about the entire economy of whole states. This is a remarkable thing. And the worst part of it, John, this was entirely preventable. If we had a controller who several years ago, let's say, had stopped to say, hey, let's upgrade the computer systems at the state unemployment insurance program so that they can actually tell who should be getting benefits from who can't. If we had done that, let's say, 10 years ago, when in fact the state auditor said we needed to do it, we would never have had this fraud in the first place. But now what's happened instead is we have a bunch of politicians walking around. No one wants to accept responsibility for it. I'll tell you what I do on day one. On day one, I get in there and I say, here are the 5 changes you absolutely must make as governor who oversees this program, the department that oversees this program. I am going to make you do these 5 things, and if you do not do them within a certain period of time, everybody is going to know about it. We are going to go on every single radio station, every single television station in this state, and talk about how you have failed the people of the state of California. We need real accountability and real solutions, and we've had neither when it comes to this. Again, John, no one is talking about this. I know you are. I know others, fellow travelers are. But too many in the mainstream media just ignore this problem. This is a huge fraud that's been perpetrated on the people of the state of California, and every single taxpayer in the state should be angry about it.
If you have a dispute with the IRS, you better hire a good attorney because you're probably going to lose. In fact, the burden of proof is on you, the taxpayer. In the state of California, we were a little bit more forgiving. We had the Board of Equalization where if you had a tax dispute with the state, you could go to a committee of elected officials and you could make your case, and elected officials are much more likely to side with the taxpayer than bureaucrats would be. But the Board of Equalization, and you'd be a member of the board if you elected controller, had much of their power taken away from them in recent years. Jerry Brown and the legislature decided that there were too many problems over there, and they wanted to take the power away from the electeds and create the California Department of Tax and Fee Collection, where if you have a tax dispute with the state is probably going to reflexively rule against you because there's no motivation for them to give you a fair shake. They're not running for re-election. They don't have to face taxpayers if they vote against someone who deserves maybe a different dollar amount that they owe or an extension, something along those lines. What would you do to bring back order and bring back the power and the ability for taxpayers to have their say in front of the Board of Equalization?
Well, taxpayers, first of all, have to understand what their money is being spent on. And the notion that we're going to go and create new programs and new departments, there's been a lot made, John, of how big of a surplus we have in California. I put surplus in air quotes because some of that money is funny money coming from the federal government that has to be used for certain things and really can't be counted in the surplus. But if you look at Gavin Newsom and what he wants to do, he wants to create 400 new programs that are really one-time spending programs. And this is just an example of, just as you said, taking power from an existing bureaucracy, creating another bureaucracy that's not even necessarily going to defend taxpayer interests. I think one of the very first things we have to do is we have to help taxpayers understand, where is your money going in the first place? What are you going to do if you have a particular issue that needs to be resolved? You should know where you need to go. To go back to the unemployment insurance scandal for a minute, one of the worst parts of that was that taxpayers had to hire people to reach a government agency. And I'd imagine this department that you've talked about, this department of tax and fee collections, is a similar problem. There's no responsiveness there. So we've got to create responsiveness and accountability. And as I said, that starts really with an approach that maximizes transparency. So people understand, hey, this is exactly how my tax dollars are being spent.
How important is the recall for your race? And I say that because Republicans currently don't have any statewide elected officials. The last time that happened in a down ballot race, it was Steve Poizner for insurance commissioner, and Arnold Schwarzenegger won re-election at the top of the ticket, and his coattails brought Steve Poizner along with him. If Larry Elder or Kevin Faulkner or John Cox or Caitlyn Jenner or whoever ends up winning the recall election and puts their name as the incumbent Republican governor on the ballot in the fall for the general election, is that an important piece of the puzzle for getting you elected controller too?
Yeah, I think who it is and the outcome of this specific, in terms of who the replacement is probably less important than what the recall effort overall signifies. And it signifies a frustration with what's going on in California. And I think, we always talk about political pendulums. The political pendulum swings from one side to the other, and it doesn't keep going in a single direction, as you know, John. At some point, it comes back. And what I think the recall shows us is the level of frustration that people are experiencing, the challenges we have in this state. These are very real challenges, and they're not getting fixed. They're not getting addressed. And people want to send reformers to Sacramento. They want to send people there who are actually going to get something done. So for me, at least, the recall signifies, I think, a very good trend in California in terms of what voters want. They want accountability. They want change. And I think regardless of what happens in this recall, and by the way, I do hope that Gavin Newsom's recalled because I think he has not performed the duties of his job as he should and as California voters expect him to. But I fully expect that when we get to next year, when we get to my election, that desire for change, that desire for something new, the desire for problem solvers, that's going to remain. And I fully intend to make the case to people throughout the state that if they want a problem solver, if they want someone to go in and actually shake things up in an area where we can have an impact, I'm their guy. And I hope that case is successful next year.
Last question before you go. For so many of those down ballot races, the big public employee unions are the 800-pound gorilla. They're the ones that spend the money. They're the ones whose endorsement matters. How important is it to have someone looking over the state's books who isn't beholden to the public employee unions?
Independence is a key to this job. I'm not going to be beholden to one party or another, to one ideology or another. I have a personal point of view. I think it's important for us to be responsible with people's money. I think that's a very important thing. But I'm going to be a check on the one-party monopoly in Sacramento. I'm going to be a check on all the different forces that have controlled Sacramento for too long. They've never had to respond to anybody. They've been able to do whatever they want. All of the different entities in the Sacramento swamp. We're going to go in there and we're going to clean it up. We're going to finally have somebody watching over, as you say, everybody and what they're doing and giving power and information to the taxpayer where it belongs.
Lanhee Chen, candidate for California State Controller. You can follow him on Twitter at Lanhee Chen and get him online at chenforcalifornia.com. Thanks so much for stopping by and best of luck.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.
Likewise. It's 2:50. Let's take a look at the roads.